All right, everyone, buckle up, because today we're diving deep into a story you probably think you know, Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
But have you ever stopped to think about what happened after they left the Garden of Eden?
That's where things get really interesting.
Oh, absolutely. We're cracking open this ancient book, the first book of Adam and Eve.
It's not part of the Bible?
Nope. But it tells their story.
In a whole new way.
And yeah, get this. There are some seriously wild twists and turns along the way.
It really makes you rethink what you thought you knew about Adam and Eve. What's fascinating about this book is that it dives into their lives outside of paradise.
Okay, so paint me a picture here. They go from this perfect Garden of Eden, right, where they have everything they could ever want, to what exactly? Help me understand what they were thrust into.
Okay, so picture this. You're in this lush, beautiful park. Everything's green, peaceful.
Okay, I'm with you.
Suddenly, you're thrown into a world of scorching deserts, rocky mountains, and thick, dark forests. You're surrounded by things you've never seen before, things that are scary, even dangerous.
That's quite the contrast. So it wasn't just the scenery that changed for Adam and Eve. This book also says they changed too, right?
It does. They lost something called their bright nature. Think of it like their senses were dulled.
Oh, interesting.
Like they couldn't see as far. Everything just seemed harsher, more intense. Can you imagine going from that perfect paradise to a world that suddenly feels, I don't know, kind of overwhelming?
Oh, man, I'd be freaking out. So what did they do? Did they just, like, wander around aimlessly trying to figure things out?
Well, thankfully, God didn't just abandon them. He pointed them towards a place called the Cave of Treasures.
Okay, a glimmer of hope.
And he promised them that eventually things would get better, that they would find salvation.
But I'm guessing the journey to that Cave of Treasures wasn't exactly a walk in the park.
Not at all. Their path was filled with challenges and, of course, temptations.
Oh, yeah, we can't forget about him.
Yeah.
Enter Satan. Stage left.
He really doesn't make things easy for them, does he?
No. He pops up constantly throughout the book, wearing all sorts of different disguises. I mean, talk about commitment.
He's like a master of disguise.
1 minute he's a serpent, the next he's an angel of light, then a charming old man. He even appears as beautiful women.
Oh, yeah. He's definitely not afraid to use whatever he can to trick them.
Wow, so sneaky. What was his game plan? What was he trying to accomplish with all these disguises and tricks?
I think his ultimate goal was to lead them astray, to tempt them, to make them disobey God. He kept trying to lure them back to the garden, or he'd offer them things that seemed good but were actually dangerous.
So it's like this constant battle, right?
Yeah.
Adam and Eve are longing for that paradise they lost. But God has a different plan for them.
It really is. It makes you think about the choices we make, even when we're yearning for something we can't have.
Totally. So while they're trying to figure out Satan's riddles and resist his temptations, they're also experiencing life as the first humans ever. That had to be mind-blowing.
Oh, absolutely. Just imagine they were seeing everything for the first time. The sun rising, they probably thought the world was on fire. The first time they felt hunger and thirst. It was a crash course in what it means to be human.
That's incredible. No instruction manual, no internet searches. They were figuring it all out from scratch. Speaking of figuring things out, what about that serpent? After getting cursed by God, did he just slither off and call it a day?
Well, not exactly. The book describes him as this slippery, mean creature. He's forced to crawl around in the dust, eating dirt. It even says that the other animals hated him, like he became this symbol of, I don't know, everything deceitful and bad.
Wow, talk about consequences.
Yeah,
I bet Adam and Eve steered clear of him after that. Or did they have another run-in?
Oh, there's this one intense scene. Adam and the serpent actually get into a fight. Can you believe that? Luckily, an angel shows up just in time to save Adam.
Phew, close call. Okay, so this book is full of prophecy. What's the deal with that 5.5 days thing?
Right. God tells Adam and Eve that he'll send his word to save them after 5.5 days. But here's the catch. It's not meant literally.
Oh, so it's symbolic. What does it represent?
Many believe it stands for 5,500 years, like a timeline leading up to the arrival of someone very special who would come to help humanity.
I see. So it's hinting at something much bigger.
Exactly. And there are other prophecies sprinkled throughout the book. Lots of them focus on the idea of suffering and sacrifice leading to salvation for humanity.
Okay, I'm starting to see some connections here. Now, we can't forget about Cain and Abel. I vaguely remember that story, how Cain killed his brother. Wait, that's in this book too.
It is.
What's this version of the story like?
Well, first you have the birth of Cain and his twin sister Lulu, followed by Abel and his twin sister Aklia. And the book explains that Cain was super jealous of his brother Abel.
Oh, sibling rivalry, the oldest story in the book. What made it so bad in this case?
It seems like a big part of it was that Adam and Eve wanted Abel to marry Lulua, who was considered the more beautiful twin.
Oh, so there's a love triangle in the mix. That definitely adds fuel to the fire. So where does Satan fit into all of this? I'm sure he couldn't resist getting involved.
You know him too well. He whispers in Cain's ear, constantly playing on his jealousy and anger, until Cain just snaps and does the unthinkable.
Wow, that's heavy stuff. So the first death in this story is a brother killing his own brother. It seems like the world outside Eden is full of really tough lessons. What about Adam and Eve's relationship? Did they ever actually get married?
They did, but wouldn't you know it, even their marriage had its challenges. And you can probably guess who's behind it all.
Let me guess.
Satan.
The one and only. He tries to trick Adam into marrying Eve without God's blessing.
What? Why?
It's like he was trying to get them to sin again. He shows Adam all these angelic couples, probably to make him jealous and rush into things.
Oh, that sneaky devil. So were Adam and Eve fooled this time? Well, they're definitely more cautious now. They don't want to mess things up even further, so they actually pray to God for guidance. And it's only when they receive God's approval and instructions that they go ahead and get married.
So they're learning to trust God more.
It seems so. Even something as beautiful and natural as marriage became a test for them.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. It's like their whole life outside Eden is this constant struggle to understand this new world, figure out their relationship with God, and learn how to resist those temptations.
You got it. They're making mistakes, facing challenges, but also growing and learning along the way.
It's like all of us, right?
Exactly. Their story is relatable, even thousands of years later. You know, it's really interesting how this book doesn't shy away from the difficult parts of life. Like, it doesn't just focus on Adam and Eve's relationship with God, but also their relationships with each other and their children.
Yeah, it's like they're pioneers, like figuring out how to be a family in this totally new and strange world. And let's be real, they don't always get it right.
Definitely not. Like when Satan tries to sabotage their marriage before it even begins.
Right. Like, dude, give them a break.
I know, right? He's always there lurking, trying to pull them away from God and each other. But what I find fascinating is how they respond to those temptations this time around. They seem much more aware of the slippery slope of sin.
So they're learning from their mistakes, a little wiser after being tricked so many times.
Exactly. They're thinking about consequences, not just giving in to their desires. But we have to remember they're still dealing with some intense emotions. Fear, grief, that longing for the paradise they lost. And on top of all that, they're trying to make sense of a world that's full of darkness and pain. It's a far cry from that garden they were kicked out of.
And then you throw in the whole Cain and Abel situation. Adding those twin sisters to the mix really makes things even more complicated.
It does. It highlights those very human emotions of possessiveness, jealousy, envy. I mean, we can all relate to wanting something someone else has. But this story takes it to a whole other level.
And that jealousy leads to the first murder. It's a pretty heavy topic for any story, but especially one that's about the very first humans. Like, is it saying that violence is just inherently a part of who we are?
That's a great question. What I find interesting is that the first book of Adam and Eve doesn't actually present violence as something inevitable. Instead, it shows how negative feelings like anger and resentment can be manipulated, leading to really awful consequences.
So it's more about the choices we make. Like, Cain could have made a different choice.
Precisely. He could have chosen forgiveness over revenge. He could have resisted Satan's influence, but he didn't. And that choice had tragic consequences. Not only for Abel, but for Cain himself.
That's true. The punishment he receives is pretty harsh. Constant trembling, marked for life. It's like he's going to be living with that guilt forever. I thought God offered him some protection too.
You're right. Even though Cain had committed this awful act, God still showed him mercy. He placed a mark on Cain to protect him from being killed by others. It's this powerful reminder that even when we mess up really badly, there's still a chance for grace.
That's a really powerful message. Even after everything Adam and Eve have been through, the loss of Eden, the hardships of life outside the garden, now the sin of their own child, there's still hope.
Absolutely. And that hope is directly connected to those prophecies we talked about earlier. Remember that promise of a Savior who will come to help humanity. It's like a light at the end of the tunnel, a reminder that things can get better.
Okay, so we've talked about their spiritual journey, Satan's tricks, the challenges of family.
Yeah.
But what about the practical stuff? How did Adam and Eve actually survive outside of Eden? What did they do all day?
That's where the book gets really down to earth. Remember, they went from this magical garden where everything was provided for them to a world where they had to figure out how to feed, clothe, and shelter themselves.
No more magical fruit trees or singing angels. They have to actually work for a living.
Exactly. The book describes how they learned to work the land, to plant crops, and harvest food. They went from living in paradise to becoming, well, the world's first farmers.
Wow, talk about a major lifestyle change. But I can't imagine farming was easy, especially with Satan lurking around, always ready to cause trouble.
You're right. There's actually a scene where Adam and Eve are working hard in their cornfield, and guess what? Satan sets it on fire.
Are you serious? That's just cruel. He's like the ultimate bad neighbor.
I know, right? But it also raises a really interesting question. How do we deal with setbacks in our own lives? Do we just give up, or do we find a way to keep going even when things are tough?
That's a great question to think about. It's like Adam and Eve's story is a lesson in resilience. They face so many obstacles, but they never completely lose hope. And they even find ways to connect with God in their new reality, right?
Yeah.
Like through offerings and sacrifices.
Exactly. They're establishing rituals and routines that become the foundation for religious practices for generations to come.
So they're basically inventing religion as they go along, trying things out, making mistakes, but always searching for that connection with something bigger than themselves.
Exactly. It's like they're trying to rebuild that relationship with God that they lost when they left the garden.
This is all so fascinating. It's like we're getting a glimpse into the origins of faith, how our ancestors wrestled with these big questions about life and death, good and evil. I feel like I'm learning so much.
Me too. And that's one of the reasons why these ancient texts are so powerful. They connect us to those universal human experiences, those questions that people have been asking for centuries.
Okay, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. Adam and Eve's life outside the garden, their struggles, their family, even their farming skills. But we can't wrap things up without talking about one of the most impactful events in the whole story.
You're talking about the birth of Cain and Abel and everything that led to that first act of violence.
That's right. It's a story that raises some serious questions about human nature, choice, and the consequences of our actions. And we're going to explore it in depth in part 3 of this deep dive.
Yeah, it's a story that really stays with you, doesn't it? Like, how do we even begin to understand this? The first act of violence. The first time blood is shed.
Right, it kind of casts a shadow over everything else, you know. It makes you wonder if violence is just part of being human. Like, is it baked into us somehow?
That's the million-dollar question. It's something people have been debating for, like, forever. But what's interesting is that the first book of Adam and Eve doesn't present violence as this inevitable thing.
Okay, so it's not like we're all doomed to repeat it.
It doesn't seem that way. The book shows how powerful emotions like jealousy and anger can be twisted and manipulated, which can then lead to terrible, terrible things.
So it's more about the choices we make then. Cain could have chosen a different path.
Exactly. He could have resisted those whispers from Satan. He could have chosen to forgive Abel, but he didn't. And the consequences were huge, not just for Abel, obviously, but for Cain, too.
That's true. He's condemned to wander the earth, always trembling, marked for life. It's like he's carrying that guilt forever. But I thought God also offered him some protection.
You're remembering correctly. Even though Cain did this horrible thing, God still showed him mercy. He put a mark on Cain. Not to punish him, but to protect him.
Protect him from what?
From other people. So no one would try to kill him. It's this really powerful reminder that even when we do something wrong, God's grace is still there.
It's incredible, isn't it? Even after being kicked out of Eden, dealing with all this hardship, and then having their son commit this terrible sin, there's still hope for Adam and Eve.
Oh, absolutely. And that hope is woven into those prophecies we've been talking about, the promise of a savior who will come and essentially heal the world. It's this beacon of light, this reminder that things can and will get better.
It's amazing how this ancient book isn't just about the past, but it also points toward the future. A time when humanity might be redeemed, when sin and death are, I don't know, conquered.
Exactly. And it makes you think about your own life, your own struggles, the mistakes you've made, the hopes you cling to, what keeps you going, even when things get really, really hard.
Wow. This has been quite the deep dive, from that perfect Garden of Eden to that mysterious cave of treasures. We've encountered Satan in all his sneaky disguises. We've witnessed the first sunrise, the first marriage, the first death. It's like we've traveled through the very beginnings of humanity.
It really has been a journey, hasn't it? And it leaves us with so much to ponder. What does it mean to be human? What's our relationship with God? How do we make choices between good and evil? These are questions that the first book of Adam and Eve really pushes us to wrestle with.
It's like this ancient text is reaching out to us across time,
Yeah.
asking us to examine our own lives, our own beliefs, and our place in this grand story of creation.
And it reminds us that even though we may feel far from paradise, our story isn't over yet.
This has been an incredible exploration of the first book of Adam and Eve. We've uncovered some really interesting stuff, asked some tough questions, and ultimately found a message of hope. What resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. And if you're hungry to learn more about fascinating ancient texts like this one, be sure to check out the summary books available in our shop. You'll find the link in the description.